All right. Well, it's Healthcare Unfiltered, and I always get excited when I meet, first of all, newcomers on the podcast, but entrepreneurs, folks who have really made a difference in the healthcare ecosystem and came up with ideas that we others have not thought about, or maybe thought about, but they were not able to execute. I always say you can always have ideas, but it's all about executions. I've had plenty of ideas in my life and executed on probably nothing. But Dr. Penn Casavant, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Ben, you're the CEO of Tasso, and I want to just, before we get into how you formed Tasso as a co-founder, just a bit about you and how did your career start and some background.
Yeah, happy to. I'm a biomedical engineer by training. I got really interested in the field of microfluidics when I was an undergraduate at Berkeley. Because the ability to really miniaturize systems and bring things really down to that similar cellular level was really intriguing as a parallel to central computer processing. We're living in the Bay Area. You see everything getting miniaturized, everything getting faster. Equating that over to the field of diagnostics where you have these big machines similar to these central computers. How do you miniaturize that? How do you make things smaller, faster, cheaper, so that you can really democratize healthcare in a similar way as computing? So I got the bug early on in my career in college, and then pursued graduate school after that. Got unilaterally rejected from graduate schools coming out of Berkeley. But then, I worked with a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Dave Beebe, who's really one of the really powerful people in the field. Talked my way into having a one-year stint there, turned that into a PhD. And I really got excited, and your background's in oncology, as you mentioned. Really got excited by the application of these technologies as they could affect and impact the growing world of precision diagnostics in oncology. So my project specifically was around circulating tumor cells, ctDNA, as I was making tools that could, better predict which of these four medications actually made a difference to a patient. It was really incredibly exciting because, you take this guesswork out of it, the guesswork and sort of using people as a petri dish and change it into, hey, how can we proactively look at these things? How can we take primary samples and be able to look at, specifically how to better target somebody's disease and progression. So it was a really exciting time. It was a lot of fun, and working in the lab really taught me a lot of things during my PhD. But one of the predominant things was, as we really got going with the research, getting people in was incredibly challenging. It was just really hard. People lived, wherever they might, far away from the sites, wherever they may be. And so we really started seeing that as a unique problem and, dove into that a little bit more, tried to figure out, hey, if blood is needed everywhere, why is it still so arcane to get the blood samples themselves? So really started diving into that problem set, and that led me to Tasso to form the company here with my co-founder and kicking that off and growing it ever since.
You're right. In any type of disease, or if you need to do a blood test, some folks have gotten around by sending the phlebotomist or like a truck or something like, you just go and just do it. So, that's how people got around it. But you thought differently.
Yeah, the way I see it is, and again, this is kind of dating myself maybe a little bit, but when I was in graduate school, when we founded the company, right, Netflix was sending DVDs in the mail,
Yeah.
right? You just had the onset of Amazon starting to ship just about anything. I remember I signed up for Amazon Prime, like when they first switched it over from, guaranteed 2 day into like the signing of the subscription to really accelerate all of that. And so, you think about it that way. And like you said, with these mobile phlebotomists, right? Everything's getting delivered to your home. But if you think about the experience, right? You think about a Netflix and Amazon, any of these things that arrive in your doorstep almost like this gift. And it's like, sweet, I can do it on my own time. I can kind of do it at my own pace, all of that. And then you compare that to like, the experience of getting a Comcast person to your house or anything like that, which is like, hey, I'll show up in this 3 hour window They're usually late. They come to the wrong place. I have to carve out half my day. It just isn't the consumer experience I think that we're really looking for or want. And so when we approached the problem with Tasso, we said, look, you know, you have these patients that live 3, 4 hours away. I remember, specifically, there was one patient that I had that, we saw, analysis in the lab was trending away. And we're like, hey, you should probably come back in, if nothing else, just to like, get a standard blood draw, all this stuff. It was too expensive to send a mobile phlebotomist to, rural Wisconsin. He lived 3 or 4 hours north of Madison. And he was like, you know what? I have another appointment in a couple months. I'll just come by then. And the story goes, he never made it to that appointment, right? And so, the way we saw it is we're like, okay, it has to be delivered to people at home. It has to be scalable to all of these rural and remote locations because that's a lot of America, right? A lot of America is very spread out from the central institutions that are really doing the work. Mobile phlebotomy is just not going to be scalable, in my opinion, in that same way. So how can we deliver something that allows people to get that critical blood sample, but it's able to be done sort of by yourself, by anybody, any age, anything like that. And it has to be painless. It has to be really an elegant experience, and it has to result in that really a great sample quality at the end of the day for the laboratory, but done so in a way that's around people's own time and their own schedules and allows them to kind of take control of the process themselves. So that's kind of how we thought about the problem early on is, there has to be that technological adaptation in order to really make it possible for people to access diagnostics from home. And so we really focused on it from that and, have definitely learned a lot in the process.
So the idea is, again, of the company is instead of me going to get my blood draw, you're gonna send me something, we'll go over that I'm gonna do the blood draw while I'm at home.
Yeah, the dream here is exactly it's I'd love to get to a world of preventive medicine, right? I would love to get to a world where your doctor's like, "Hey, look, because of XYZ things, you're going to get a kit in the mail. Just, use it. It's going to be painless, nice and easy. Drop it back in the mail and the results will pop back up to both of us. We'll be able to go through it prior to sitting down together and figuring out what we're going to do about it, right? To me, that's the world of the future, right? Is how do we make stuff that's just integrated into people's life very
Mhm.
easily and gets physicians the data they need in a timely fashion so that they can better manage patients and better manage patient care.
So we talked about execution as I started. So you had the idea, which is great, and then you obviously had a good friend or a colleague who said, "Okay, that's a great idea too." How do you execute on it? Like, what do you do next? How do you just get off the ground? And when you started, did you look around to see if anybody else is doing the same? And what did you find?
No, I probably should have done more of that. Certainly did not. It was interesting, right? Because as a graduate student, right, there's two things that you do all the time, right? You do the science, so you just get in and you just generate prelim data to say, am I even in the same stratosphere as where I need to be given this problem, right? So you do that, and then you write grants. And so in a lot of ways, it kind of prepped us really well for startup life because that's what we did. It was we just said, hey, cool, there's this idea. Is it possible? Right. We started off actually by saying, look, let's get interstitial fluid. And so quite literally one afternoon in Wisconsin, in the living room of this house that I shared, we just bought a whole bunch of different apparatuses to try to get interstitial fluid, right? Everything from these weird, collagen induction things that were on, that you could buy on Amazon to standard lancets, right? So we just immediately started that, which led us down this road of saying, okay, it's hard to get interstitial fluid. But blood actually was kind of easy. Oh, where on the body is it easy to collect? So, it just kind of led us down the pathway of just iterating quickly and saying, okay, what do we need to prove at a basic level to see if this is even possible, and even something worth spending time on? All the while, checked on all the grant websites to just try to figure out, is there something that fits with this need scientifically? And so we really just started that process in parallel, got some initial results that were really exciting, but at the same time, through business plan competitions and through Actually, DARPA ended up being one of our initial funders. Got a first grant, and really combining the two of those things, really, that set the foundation of, I think, the business that we grew from there.
As you were starting, I mean, if you go back, what were like, the biggest challenge? Well, I'm sure getting money and raising money, any startup, that's the biggest challenge. But short of that, what was it that you're like, really was keeping you up at night and was your biggest challenge as you're starting the company?
Early on, I think it's trying to figure out what to do, right? Because like you said, there are a million ideas, and it's very easy to get lost in thinking about what is the best thing to do, or trying to think too far ahead to figure out what you should avoid. And what we really did early on, and I credit, my co-founder a lot with this, is, we had very active debates to figure out what to do. But then we set ourselves up really to the next immediate milestone to say, well, we need to prove this. Awesome. Like, how do we just go do that and attack that problem? And so instead of thinking about, hey, how do we scale this to the billions of people and all this sort of thing, it's just like, no, no, no. Let's think very next step. Like, what are the things that we have to put in place so that we can just make it to the next milestone, right? Figure out as quickly as possible. Okay, we have to get blood. How do we get blood? Great, let's do that. Let's get to this step. Okay, how do we actually make a functional thing that does that? What are the pieces that need to get done? Do we need 3D prints? What is it? And so it really was figuring out how to just put one foot in front of the other and execute, like you said. That was critically important in those early days, because that really gave us momentum as a business. And we weren't always right, but at least getting that motion and getting to that milestone allowed us to then pick our heads up and figure out, okay, what's the next step we need to take? So I think I credit that to a lot of the early
Hmm.
success of Tasso.
Yeah. And so how old is Tasso now?
Not quite old enough to go to college, but getting there. We're about 10 or 11 years old now,
And
depending
you're a
on the
private
official
company,
founding date.
right? You're a private
That's right.
company. And
Yep.
are you able to share with us, if you can, where the name Tasso come from?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so in one of those similar founder debates, we're trying to figure out the name, and sitting down with my co-founder, and we're like, look, there's the Greek god of this or whatever. There are all these like very pompous sort of names. And we were at the time, students, graduate students, postdocs at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so just for fun, we're like, what's Badger in a couple different names, right? Because Madison are the Badgers.
Of course.
And so Tasso is actually Italian for Badger because, go Badgers.
So I was trying to think. I really tried before we started. I was like, where's this come from?
It's not the ham. We
No.
get that a lot, but it's definitely not the ham.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your offerings. Like right now, is what you're offering various devices for various bodily fluids that need to be collected, just blood, maybe? I mean, I don't know. Tell us exactly what are the offerings of Tasso. That's the first question. And my second question um, is, we'll get to it, but I want to understand better your customer base. Is it me as a patient? If my doctor orders a blood test, then I call you and I say, I don't want to travel, or is it the doctor contracts with you? I'm trying just to understand the journey, how the patient is involved in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with the offerings. And, at a very basic level, we started with blood really because, and I think this will actually answer kind of both your questions, but at the end of the day, I firmly believe that the source of need for diagnostics are the physicians prescribing stuff, the scientists running data. It's all of those people who are saying, I need this data to do XYZ things, right? And so functionally, we're building offerings, and as a customer base, we're really focused on those people. Um, and so, if you think about the physician, I need a blood sample, right? As a researcher, I needed a blood sample. I couldn't get a blood sample. And yes, there's other data that you need, right? Being an oncologist, of course, all the gamut of things. But the way that we saw it is blood is one of the most ubiquitous. It's very often that if you're prescribed something, any medication, you usually have to check the liver, you usually have to check, CBC, you usually have to check the kidney function. There are a handful of things that you need to know, right? alongside of that, sure, you might get imaging, or you might get urinalysis, you might get blood pressure, heart rate, those things. But but blood is, and the stat I think is it's implicit in 70% of medical decision making. And so we really wanted to focus on that as saying, there isn't a good way to get blood samples, right? The nearest alternatives is a venipuncture draw that is very traumatic and time consuming, all the things, or a finger stick, which I just don't see scaling necessarily to the population at large. So we focused on that, and so we created a suite of products. The one right now that is the predominant seller for us is called Tasso Plus, and so Tasso Plus is a blood collection device. It's small; it's about the size of a ping pong ball, and it goes on the upper arm. You press a button and collects about half a mil of blood, 500 microliters of blood, as our really core product offering. Around that, we've built other services because, how do you ship it to the patient? How do you make sure it gets back to partner labs? How do you make sure that we now have a digital guide that can walk patients through it to make sure it's all seamless? Because at the end of the day, we want to make really sure that anybody who uses our product has an elegant experience and is able to get the data they need reliably from whatever source they need it from. And so that's how we think about our services on top of the core devices themselves. And just as an aside, a great example of this is we're actually doing a big study right now with the Parkinson's Foundation, where I think they've now surveyed over 5,000 participants using Tasso's devices in this sort of home testing type of setup. And so our services have really enabled those Parkinson's disease patients to not only be able to use the product seamlessly, but also get it back to the labs that the Parkinson's Foundation are using so that they could get the genetic results they need. Again, all in a seamless fashion and really reliably. So that's the core products,
No,
right?
I love the end to
Overall.
end. It's
Yep.
really great. But before we go into the next thing, I'm curious. So you put that device on the arm and you collect. I mean, as you know, certain tests require different type of tubes, right? I mean, in
Yep.
general, the traditional way of like purple top, green top, some of them have EDTA, whatever it is, you know the drill.
Yep.
So, but what you showed me is just like a small thing. You just press and you get. So, do you have to do different ones depending on what you're getting, or somehow that one device doesn't really care whether I'm doing CBC, CMP, coags, everything can be collected in that one thing?
Yeah, we're starting out with the one thing for now, right? For the simplicity of patients' purpose, there's one device that has one type of tube attached to it, and that's kind of how we've simplified the collection process. But just like you said, there's a rainbow of different tube types with different anticoagulants in them that are run for different tests. And so I'd actually trace back to an early design philosophy that we had, which is we want to, and we still want to make sure that we can get as integrated as possible in the system today. And so from an early standpoint, we really focused our design to say labs are very used to using tubes. There are a bunch of different tubes that are used. There's microtainers, there's grinder mini collectors, there's a bunch of different sort of an ecosystem of these different tubes that are available. So instead of reinventing the wheel, we're like, look, if we can just collect our blood into a system that labs are somewhat already used to, then it'll make it integrate more easily to the labs and therefore help us get to a more scalable product ultimately. So from a very early standpoint, we chose to, use kind of that off-the-shelf tube to be able to collect blood directly into something that already had the right anticoagulants in it. And the beauty on the laboratory side of it is, a lot of the systems of how physicians order tests, they just select the different tests, how it makes it into the lab system to figure out what tubes are needed, is fairly it's not very modern, right? It's not something where it's really been optimized all that much. And especially if you have somebody who's sitting there with a needle already in their vein, it's very easy to collect tube after tube and collect a ton of volume. The reality is most of the volume is not used in a blood tube in a test. Also, many of the tests can be run on a same tube, but if you already have somebody who's plugged in, it's easy enough to get a separate tube. And so some of what we've been doing is working with some of these labs to say, the labs are saying, well, we can do a lot of this on that single sample. And hey, as a physician, we only need XYZ tests or whatever. And so we've been really able to help people streamline their processes by only collecting a single tube, again, making sure that patient experience is really elegant, but enabling more tests on the back end from that single tube
So what can I
because of the
order?
lab.
Yeah, what can I order? Like if I'm going to use your services for my patient, what tests can I order using Tasso Plus?
Yeah, on that side, and this is a really important point, is we're really the facilitators on the blood draw side of things. But we have these partner laboratories that are enabling a wide variety of tests. And so as they go and get their new tests validated, there's something that we can kind of flow through that people can access, therefore, through the use of our device. And so in that sense, it really depends a lot on what that laboratory
Got
has
it.
live and is
Okay, so
able
you
to
get
do.
them the blood and it goes to the lab, and then the lab will deal with that. And then the patient,
Exactly.
and again, I love the idea of patient convenience and the end to end. So I'm a patient, I got the kit, I put this on my arm, I got the blood draw, then I ship it, I just put it in a container, and
That's
like what
right.
happens?
Yeah, so the way that we do it is we have really two basic modalities. Either they just put it back in the box and ship it, either, have it directly picked up, which we have directly integrated now with FedEx and UPS, or they can just drop it off at a site. We've actually found that drop off is slightly more preferred, because then it makes it a little bit easier for people, than trying to schedule the time for somebody to swing by their front porch or whatever. And I think people like the feeling of, like,
Right.
here's my protected sample. I want to make sure I drop it off and that it's, safe on its transit back. So we do both of those. But the other thing that we also have now, is we have ways to actually do a bit more temperature buffering to make sure that heat spikes, or, if
Mhm.
it gets too cold, whatever, that all of those are shaved off. So we actually have some special packaging that helps buffer for different temperature spikes, and it just helps, again, make sure that the samples get back to the lab in a quality fashion that they're able to run for whatever they need.
I presume you're looking at other type of tests aside from blood. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to think. I mean, given where you are, I presume maybe ways to collect urine samples, saliva. Is that in the pipeline? Like, is this something you're working on, or am I
Yeah, I mean,
speculating?
the way that I think about it in general, right, is um, we would like to access a more continuum of data in general, right? It pairs directly in with a lot of the things happening now with AI, but fundamentally, I think about Tasso as really a data enabler company. It's how can we, if you can send this to people at home, and actually we have some really cool stats on this, in a study that was run at the University of Michigan. But they actually asked these transplant patients, like, hey, you use this painless device at home in this study, measuring tacrolimus, right? And then they did the traditional, like, come into the clinic and do a venipuncture draw for tacro. And what they found is, afterwards they surveyed the patients and they said, hey, like, you know, how many times a year would you come in and do both of the methods? And the patient said, hey, for a venipuncture draw, like once or maybe twice, right? Like that's kind of all I'm going to do. But for the Tasso device, they said, oh, we do it 4 to 6 times, no problem. Um, and in the responses underneath, they were a lot of the patients were saying, look, we get that more data might actually be better to manage my tacro levels. So yeah, we want to contribute more data. We would love to. And especially if it's painless and easy, we would be happy to do that. If I have to go into the clinic, probably not. If I have to do a venipuncture draw. And so I think about things in that way, which is, if things are painless and easy to do, more patients will be able to do it. More patients will be able to do it more frequently, especially those that are on therapies or things that need to be better managed. And all of that will create a fundamentally better look at how to manage somebody's care in a personalized fashion. So if I extend that then a little further, blood is the hardest to get, right? Like I can't ask people to finger prick themselves all the time. People aren't going to do it. I can't send a mobile phlebotomist to venipuncture. They're not going to do it. But if I have something that's painless and easy to do, and the way I like to say it is, as easy as brushing your teeth. So great, we could solve that blood continuum of data. There's all the other suites of data that I think you can tap in together, and together look at a brand new body of evidence to be able to better predict certain diseases, better predict outcomes on therapies, any of the rest. And so as I think about Tasso in that future, yeah, I do believe that, and we do have some offerings that include urine, that include heart rate, all of those things. But I think it's tying it together to create that really exciting new continuum of data that can then be mined and used in ways that can be much more productive in terms of managing health.
Do you deal with the patient's insurance yourself? Like, do you have to actually bill the patient's insurance for blood collection?
Not at this point, no. And we specifically for that reason are focused on B2B sort of work, working with hospitals, working with telemedicine, like all of these sorts of providers who then are the ones who are managing patients on the front end. So at this point, no, we don't do anything on the medical billing or reimbursement.
So I'm imagining myself, you're coming to me, I'm either clinic or a hospital, wherever it is, and you're telling me about this. I'm struggling in telling you no, because I see a lot of value. And this is just for folks who are listening, by the way. Guys, I'm not getting paid by anyone for this. This is really done completely. Well, I want to make sure this is not really I mean, I'm not. But why, like, where are the issues? Like when people say, okay, it's great, we're not going to work with you. Where's the issue? Is it they're not seeing the value, or is it just simply a business decision? I just can't pay for it right now, stuff like that, which is the latter I don't really care about. It is what it is, that's budget and money. What I care about is, have you had any people who said, I'm not really seeing the value in what you're bringing beyond just the financial aspect of it? You know what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, in a lot of ways, it's really exciting to me because pretty much every physician that we talk to is like, yes, or very
Right.
much yes. Every patient we talk to is like, oh my gosh, how can I get access to this? How can I get my doctor to be able to prescribe it, right? And so to me, it hasn't been that many no's for Tasso. I think we get hung up sometimes with procurement folks who are saying, well, I can buy a Lancet for 25 cents or your device for how much?
I see.
There's some of that, right? But I think really it's more about how does this really integrate in the system in a broader way, right? So we've spent a lot of time working with pharma, working with the big laboratories, working with the big hospital systems. We actually have a really exciting announcement that probably will come out before this airs, but
So you
we
could say
actually
it.
just
It's
signed a.
this is not airing before the end of June, so you could say it. Nobody's gonna
There you
hear it
go.
except me.
Yeah, so just it probably will come out before then. But
Yeah,
yeah, we have a brand new agreement with the Mayo Clinic that we just signed, and so it's working with these institutions to say,
right.
okay, where do we provide the most value to start, right? How can we go and show in one use case, some of the data, right, where we get 20%, like 20 points better boost in patient compliance, right? So a lot of these things there's a 50% patient compliance to testing. Well, hey, if you use Tasso, that bumps it up 20 extra percent to, that 70-75% range. That's amazing for these use cases, right? And so we're really building that body of evidence to say, look, where does that have an outsized impact on the overall ability to treat patients' care? And then we'll be able to expand from there. But I believe it has to be integrated. It has to be something that, just like you said, you as a physician can say, awesome, give this to my patient and the billing reimbursement, all the flow, everything works so that it can be a full solution, as opposed to having too many nuances or too many hiccups in that process. And that's a fairly complicated process because phlebotomy isn't really reimbursed. It's all rolled into the cost of the lab testing. Sending this kid out to the home is going to cost more money than having somebody come into the hospital, right? And that's borne by the patient. So you need to have something that the patient bears in this process too. So there are lots of those nuances I think that we've learned along the way. But we've been making some amazing progress. And again, seeing the results on the back end and seeing all the data come through as far as better patient adherence and compliance, I think that's really what continues to drive us and to see that opportunity to really make a big leap forward and the ability to manage and create better patient healthcare.
So you mentioned something in passing. I thought you talked about AI, and I'm working in AI. I can't let that like slip. You have to tell me a bit more about that. Where's AI being integrated into what you're doing at Tasso right now?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, like not much now. But the way I see it is if you just look at the pace of change of AI in just about any industry, right? It's getting doubly better every month. And so I think unless you're thinking in that way of how is the data that I'm creating or using going to be useful in an AI future, I think you're going to find yourself quickly left behind. And so for Tasso, the way I see it is, we've racked our brain in a million ways. And honestly, we see all of these technologies and companies coming out with face scanning technology and,
Yeah.
heat mapping, all of these things, right? To say, plug that into AI and let's see if we can predict somebody's A1C score. Let's see if we can predict heart disease, all of those things. I think that's phenomenal. I think it's really exciting. But the problem with all of that is you're not going to get the core information that is actually helpful to patients unless you're looking in the bloodstream. And so that's why I think about it in that way is I think AI is going to be incredibly powerful in the future. If I were to apply AI to existing data sets in diagnostics, it's very parsed. You're only in a certain health system for a certain amount of time. Plop yourself in the shoes of one of your patients, for example. All the data comes back, of course, within the medical record, so long as they're not changing insurance providers, changing hospitals, or if they're moving locations, right? Now you have somebody who's boom into a different system. And so looking at some of these data sets, they're very fragmented. You have somebody that shows up and does a blood draw request, and then, oh, I actually am close to the clinic today. I'll just go to the hospital. And so you have these bits and pieces everywhere. It's really hard to do anything with. So for Tasso, I'm thinking of, we're thinking about how do you actually create that longitudinal? How do you create the continuum of data first and foremost that can then be useful as people are building predictive algorithms? How do you tie in outcomes data to that as well to say, if you're given a therapy, where did that end up? Because all of those pieces are going to be what's needed to create the right algorithms. But I think we're still a few years
But do
off of
you
there.
have the data back? I mean, are you just the intermediary, or do you get the results back of the blood test that's being done? So you have a data set that you accumulate over the years, or that you send it to the lab, and then is there a loop that you actually get those back to you?
Yeah, we're working on figuring out exactly how to offer something new in that system, right?
Right.
Because fundamentally, like there's no claim that we have to the data, nor and my philosophy on it too is that I think people shouldn't try to silo their own data as much as they can. And unless they're actually providing anything new with the data, like let's get the data out there. So
Right.
to me, the step one is how can Tasso help create a data set that's novel and unique and helpful, right? Whether or not it's ours or somebody else's. Like taking us back to that example of this University of Michigan study, right? If I can start gathering 6 data points as opposed to one with tacrolimus, can I actually help make a better prediction of the therapy that these patients, not cancer transplant patients, are on? And with that, can I help minimize rejection? Right? If I can create something that does that, now I can sell that as its own endpoint, right? And I can say, look, if you put some people on this program, now you can actually see
Yeah.
the ultimate benefit and think about the cost of a transplant or rejection. Think about the cost of all of that. Like phenomenally expensive. If you can shave that down by 10-20%, now you can start to see how that program builds value. And then ultimately, like even more so, instead of doing 6 data points, if you can in the AI future take 3 or 4 and then build that into put that into the predictive program to say, are they trending away or hey, is this actually stable? And now you don't need to do it as frequently. I think you can get to a world where you're doing less testing, but in a more directed and
Mhm.
personalized fashion to actually be useful for patients. And I think that to me is the exciting future we need to get to. But again, building from the steps.
Sure. So how big Tasso is now? Like how many employees do you have? How big are you?
Yeah, we're about 70 people now in Tasso.
Yeah. So do you still, you're no longer a startup anymore. That's it. You're done with that phase, aren't you?
Yes and no. I think in some ways, sure, yeah, there's more people around getting stuff done, but I think always having that startup mentality of
Right.
figuring out what's the most important thing and attacking it hard, knowing when to sprint and when it's a marathon. I think all of that is still very much embedded in our DNA.
I mean, I don't know. So what's next? Like, what's next for you? I mean, I know that you can't share everything, but like, what's next? It seems to me that there's the opportunities to scale are humongous, but obviously it's very difficult to do that with 70 people. And I don't know, like, as you put on your business hat, take the science away, take everything, you still have a company to run and people that work for you. What is next for you as you think for the next 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think like you said, I'm very excited about some of the scientific future and how we build into an AI. But right now, the way we see it is I think we have the right ingredients and the right head start to really make a huge impact in a very direct way by getting more people just using the device, integrating it into their processes. Telemedicine is starting to really
For
expand like
sure.
crazy. And so we're just really focused on getting those applications up and going, helping get our device out into those hands, and just focused on those rinse and repeat type of business areas where we can really create nice process to just help get the device out in a repeatable way. So it's a lot of right now systems development, getting the device out, doing all of that. In parallel to that, there are a few innovations that we're really excited about that I think will make a direct impact on Tasso and help expand that. We're coming out with a device fairly soon that will do double the blood volume. And so, coming to the core of what is exciting about Tasso and what do people need? More blood, enabling more tests, all of that. And so, that's sort of our near term right now is just staying laser focused on those pieces of it, getting that nice base of business that we can then use as a catapult for all of the things in the future that we have coming as far as becoming more of a data focused company.
Well, I mean, congratulations on everything you're doing. It's really, to me, it's fascinating and it's really great. But I want to make sure I didn't forget anything that I should ask you that I may have forgotten that's really relevant to folks who are listening to this. I'm pretty confident a lot of folks who are listening to this probably don't know about this, and I'm excited to share this with them. But anything I should have asked you that I may have missed or forgotten that you think it's important to share with viewers and listeners?
No, I think these were really great questions again. Thanks for the time. The one thing I would say, and especially coming back to it, like um, in the entrepreneurship journey, we talked a lot about the start and sort of where we are now. Like definitely along the way, I think there are some twists and turns and bumps in the road. But I think, as we've helped to get through, navigate those, it's been about sticking to our own principles and figuring out, again, how do you take the immediate next step that I think has helped us even in the in-between phase as we were finding our footing. But no, it's been a great chat. And again,
Well,
thanks so
I'm
much for
I'm
having
pretty
me.
sure. I mean, there were times probably that you thought this is not going to work. I mean, it's not easy to get people believing in you because you had to go and get funding and all of these things, and you certainly receive way more no's than yeses. But all what you need is one or two yeses, and that's really all what you need. Did you ever, through the journey, doubt that you'll be able to be here 10 years later?
Oh, always. And that's part of the art, right? Is you have to dream big and execute small, right? And so in that sense, certainly along the way, and it's an overused cliche potentially, but every roadblock I think ended up being an opportunity to learn something new and do it differently.
Yeah.
And I think leaning into the journey in that way, I think was helpful because there were certainly some tough times, but yeah, there were definitely times where we thought, oh, this is going to be a tough one to overcome, and always found a way.
Well, I'm 100% confident this is not going to be your last company. 100% confident of that. But congratulations, Ben, on all of your success, and I wish you all the best and hope you can come and visit with us on the show in a year or so.
Yeah, sounds great. And thank you so much for having me. Would love to keep the conversation going in the future.